Hey folks, it's the Unsung Podcast. I'm Mark.
I'm special bonus edition
Special bonus edition Chris.
50% extra free. It's certainly starting
Comes with sunglasses.
It's starting to feel like that these days, man. Yeah, so we finally got around to it, Mark. We are going to record the follow-up question and answer session and a little bit of discussion with Stoffel of Yacøpsæ. Yacøpsæ episode went down pretty well, actually.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes you take a swing at a really quite obscure subject, and yeah, you're rewarded.
Yeah, it's good to have somebody in the room who also has knowledge of that genre more than we do.
It did help,
which is quite helpful.
Thanks for getting Joe. Joe will actually be playing a supporting role in this episode. So yeah, we did a double episode on the German. They didn't want to be called grindcore. Do we remember what
Did they not? Power to Violence?
Didn't want to be called Power Violence.
Okay, just rock combo. Which is kind of as correct.
The German punk rock band Speed something.
Speedcore?
No. I think he actually maybe says in one of these answers, so let's find out.
Yeah.
Anyway, Yacøpsæ from Hamburg. Now, I want to be clear here. Mark and I are both Scottish, and we have a hefty chip on our shoulder about getting our arses handed to us by Germany in the Euros. So we're struggling.
We didn't exactly cover ourselves in glory.
No, we didn't cover ourselves in glory. But who knows, by the time this comes out, we could have either been humiliated worse or redeemed.
Or
what's
probably both.
I was going to say what's more likely with Scotland is momentarily redeemed and then humiliated again.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll get past the German rivalry. But yeah, Yacøpsæ from Hamburg, beautiful city in the north of Germany, really amazing punk rock scene. Yacøpsæ being on the go for ages now. Please go back and listen to the double episode if you've not, because this episode might be a little bit incongruous without that. But we put a shout out around some of the hosts and the AAA group, and from the replies we got, we just sort of picked out a few questions to go in addition to Mark and myself's own questions, and just dig around in Stoffel's brain a little bit, get answers to some of the things that we speculated about. And he was a very obliging guy. He's got a lovely voice. He's got a really lovely voice. I mean, it's something about Germans speaking in English. It can either sound like movie villain or just incredibly polite.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing that, actually.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, hearing a man that plays the music that he plays be so erudite is rather nice.
Rather nice.
I think we'll kick things off. Like, Stoffel recorded a little intro for us, including his reaction to the episodes, because you never know how people are going to take it. We've talked about that in the past, where you're a little bit critical about some of the back catalogue, as well as obviously praising the one that we've selected. And so I said to him, look, be honest, give us your frank opinions.
Yeah, sometimes that ends well for us and sometimes it ends poorly. So
let's see what Stoffel had to say in response to the episode itself.
Hi, my name is Stoffel and I'm 54 years old. I'm the guitarist and vocalist in Yacøpsæ, a Hamburg-based punk band that started in August 1990. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you very much for the appreciation your podcast has shown us. We don't take that for granted. Thank you very much. As I didn't know your podcast before, I'm currently only familiar with the episodes in which you talked about us. However, I'm not generally a podcast listener, as I prefer to play records and CDs in a kind of traditional way. But it's obvious to hear how much passion you put into your work and how much fun you guys had doing this. I can't answer if you've chosen the right album with Grozny Tanz, as this always depends on individual taste. If you like it, you've definitely done the right thing. I myself can't rate the album or highlight it as something special because I don't have the emotional distance to it. And no, I didn't feel offended at any point. Why should I? We just don't like being called grindcore, because that's not what we are. For us, it's just fast punk rock.
There we go. There's the answer. Fast punk rock.
Yeah, I mean, he's right. It's fast and it is punk, so.
And it's in stone now because it's on the Unsung Podcast. Yeah, so Grozny Tanz was the album that we chose to cover, although Timio Ergo Sum, I think, got some heavy props on that episode. In fact, a bunch of them did. They've got a lot of good stuff, but that's the one that is just, for me, the Goldilocks spot in terms of ferocity and songwriting, performance.
Team Ergo Summit is in our record club now as well, thanks to Stoffel for that.
It is, yeah. So if you subscribe to Unsung Record Club for $15 a month, then you could get sent that album. One of many excellent works. Some of them
excellent works
drawn from the corners of Europe. Yeah. Do we have a good time doing this podcast? I think we do, generally speaking.
I think for a lot of it, yeah.
4 hours deep into James Bond, I was flagging a wee bit.
I know. So it does get hard sometimes when you're looking at that.
This week as well, I did also throw up some reminders of the health episode, because health were in the news.
Yeah, I didn't see them.
Oh, you fucking mug. And that wasn't a fun time. So, now and again, an episode is absolutely punishing. But yeah, Stoffel, thank you.
Interpol. Never ever wanted you to love it.
we do usually have a good time. What else came up there? He doesn't have enough distance from the album to give it a really objective appraisal.
I think that's fair. I think if you've ever released any kind of music, I think you do have an emotional connection to it. Sometimes good and sometimes bad. I appreciate his honesty in that regard. Do you think? I mean, I actually probably think maybe it's a personal thing, but I'm maybe hypercritical. There's stuff I've put. Yeah, it's still an emotional connection, though, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's true. That's true. But I mean, if someone was asking you, do you think this is good? Would you be able to acknowledge that, well, it's good, albeit flawed?
I don't.
Because you're bound to magnify the low points and not under acknowledge the highlights.
Yeah, I mean, I do that with creative output all the time as well, so no.
I guess we can tell them categorically it's a very good album.
It's a really good record,
Take it from us.
Mm-hmm. And we've listened to a lot of records. And we've listened to every single band that starts with a letter in the alphabet.
Apart from X. X is the only letter that we have not covered. Although we've done many Xmas episodes, we've yet to cover a band with X as its first letter, which was probably just something that we should get out the road.
Yeah, probably.
So the first question that Stoffel answered that we sent him is actually by Joe McGlynn of Go Down Fighting, by the way. The hardcore punk act and many other things prior to that. Go and listen to Joe's biography at the start of that Yacøpsæ episode. We can actually let Joe ask his question in his own words. Here we go.
Were you ever approached by any bigger labels throughout your career, and if so, what were they? And if you hadn't been approached, would you have considered signing to a label of bigger stature, for example, Relapse, Metal Blade, Nuclear Blast, something like that? Thanks.
We've only been approached once by a so-called bigger label, and that was Relapse from Philadelphia. When we played a few shows on the East Coast for the very first time in the US in 2006, we kicked things off at the Maryland Death Fest in Baltimore. There we were invited to visit the Relapse headquarters, as our third show of the tour would be in Philly, so it was a good possibility. We were welcomed there by various members of staff and given a kind of sightseeing tour of the building and the warehouse. We were quite impressed and even discovered a promotional poster of us on the wall in the warehouse. One employee then told us that Relapse had been watching what we were doing for a while. And of course, they also checked out our concerts in Baltimore and Philadelphia. As I remember, the guy was very nice, and each of us was even allowed to take a few CDs from the warehouse for free at the end. However, we didn't meet the two bosses, Bill and Matthew. When we got back home, we briefly got in touch with some dude from Relapse, because they were interested in making a 7-inch EP with us. I think this single was supposed to be a kind of test, as it was difficult for them to figure out if Yacøpsæ would sell well. We declined with thanks, because at that time we were collecting material for our Grozny Tanz album in a split 7-inch with Magruder grind. Relapse then offered to make us t-shirts and even sent us a contract, which we didn't sign, of course. We then broke off contact or let it go to nothing, something like this. We wouldn't necessarily have had anything against releasing something small on Relapse, but the guys from Necrophagist, who were signed to Relapse at the time, told us to be careful. For example, when Necrophagist started their 6 weeks US tour, they realized that Relapse had produced a lot of Necrophagist merchandise that the band didn't know about. On top of that, the band was offered to buy their own merchandise at cost price, so that they could offer something to their fans on tour. These are business structures that we really dislike. I think we're still best off with small underground labels that operate out of their own bedrooms. We have control everything there, and the contact is more personal and based on friendship, And no, we wouldn't sign with labels like Metal Blade or Nuclear Blast. Structurally, there is no difference to such giants like Sony, Warner, and so on. But we are not worried about that, because we're far too small for Central Media, Earache, or Metal Blade. I don't think they've ever heard of us. That's why we are under the radar, and that's a good thing.
I've actually heard that even some smaller labels, I've heard them doing similar things when it comes to merch.
They print them up and then sell it to the band.
Yeah, a close friend of mine's been part of that experience, and it does, like, if that band doesn't do particularly as much as they thought they would do or whatever, or maybe touring schedules kind of fall apart because of a worldwide crisis, it can leave a bit of a sour taste, and it leaves you in debt as well. Yeah. I can totally see it. It's like you said, it's a total business decision, and I can see it from a business point of view from the label, but they order obscene amounts of merch for you. I mean, having to sell all that on one tour is going to be tough, but then having that, I mean, we've all got t-shirts, we've heard in bands that have got t-shirts kicking about that we've made that we just can't fucking get rid of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
I chewed up all my old t-shirts and spat them into the wall as insulation.
You might as well have, man. But
he's talking about necrophagist there,
Yeah.
And their experience in Relapse. He also mentioned like he was doing a split with Magruder Grind.
That's a big deal, because they're a pretty well-known band. You know?
So you can see why Relapse might have been interested in getting involved around about that time. That's the Grozny Tanz period as well. It must be nice. I mean, do you notice he was saying there was a poster of them in the Relapse headquarters? Wonder if some intern was like really clever, like sneak that up.
Check that up. I admire the dedication to the moral principles.
Yeah, I mean, we were saying they just sort of let the correspondence slide. There's something so effortlessly cool about that that I can't really relate to, because anytime I've been contacted by a label, no matter how much I didn't fancy it, it was still like, like these guys are just so zen about that. They're like,
whatever,
it's not for us, just let it slide. I wonder what the Relapse folk thought they were. Does that happen to them all the time, that bands just let it slide?
I don't know. I mean, I'm also a bit confused about this structure of Relapse and how it differs from something like Metal Blade.
Well, yeah, I didn't realise there was such a distinction, but he seems to feel that there's quite a big difference there. I think
Dillinger Escape Plan has some issues with Relapse as well. I mean, they eventually signed to a bigger label anyway, but I think they had some issues. No, that's cool, and it's good to know they got the nod as well, because they're certainly deserving of it, musically at least.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mark, he answered your question next. Okay. So you want to tell us what you asked?
How is the scene in Hamburg? Is it in good health or bad health? Are you still an active part of it, and are there any groups from it that you would suggest?
There is quite a large punk scene in Hamburg, with many bands. Some of the first and second generation bands from the late 70s and early 80s are still active. However, I also have to say that, in my opinion, there are a lot of bad and boring bands that play the usual cliches and chords that were worn out 40 years ago. Good bands are, for example, Spitfire Stevens, who are quite Joy Division influenced.
Every time I come to the place, she's not there. Every time I ask for her, she's already gone.
Bärchen und die Milchbubis, who play punk rock with a light-hearted pop appeal, or Instinct of Survival, who operate in the tradition of stenchcore bands like Amoebics, Deviated Instinct, or Hellbastard. As far as the style we play is concerned, I'm afraid I have to say that Hamburg is the absolute wasteland when it comes to extreme hardcore. In the last 3.5 decades, there have been at most a handful of bands here that could be categorized as fastcore or power violence. At the moment, however, only We Sleep and Psych Out are in this category. There is hardly any grindcore here either, just Attack of the Mad Axemen are worth to be mentioned. We don't necessarily see ourselves as part of the Hamburg scene. Of course, we know a lot of people from the so-called scene. We have some friends among them, and we also play in independent venues or support them, but that's it, basically.
See, the more he speaks, there's two things it brings to mind. One is that Marissa's accent sometimes is a little bit similar. That kind of like that weird Greek to English twang. The other one is see when you watch one of those auto-generated Instagram reels, the AI voice.
Yeah, he's got that American pronunciation as well, which is somebody that's learned it from a young age sort of vibe.
It's interesting about Hamburg. When I was there, I did notice a lot of gig art. I think I maybe mentioned this in the show. Hamburg have this thing where like big kind of public bill posters, and they layer them upon each other over and over and over and over again till they're actually, it almost looks like that, what's it called? What's that pastry? Someone, like, I know that people will be screaming this at the podcast right now, but it's pastry? Like, you know, like the meal, is it meal? I can't remember the French term for it, but it's the pastry where there's like hundreds and hundreds of layers of it, right? Like 1,000 layer pastry, and it just all kind of like leafs up and bends it. So you get posters sticking out the wall in Hamburg that have been postered on top of each other so many times that they're actually protruding from the wall and all kind of like curling up at the edge the way that pastry does. And it's actually pretty amazing. You walk down, it underlines just how much of a legacy of live music there is there. And I did, when I was over there, I actually saw Yacøpsæ on a poster for, I think it was kind of like an all-dayer, like a kind of really extreme punk event. But then again, I assume a lot of those bands would be coming from out with the city. Hence, he's saying there's not a lot of them doing that sort of thing there. I saw some good music there, but yeah, I didn't see any like really intense punk stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that the scene there is in good health, like you say. Just that there's not really good health for bands like them that are as extreme as them. But I guess it's also heartening to know that he knows these things and he seems to still be somewhat engaged with it, even if his band don't have a lot of kindred spirits in the area.
I think one of the things we identified about Yacøpsæ as well is that even though they sound a certain way, they clearly are quite open to a lot of other styles. You know what I mean? The first band he picked out there, he said it was quite Joy Division-esque. And from some of the covers they did, and some of you remember their early stuff had almost a Joy Division vibe to it as well. Yeah, it's a big
post-punk feel to it.
Yeah, so... Yeah, they don't seem like a band that's too stuck in a rut anyway. So, okay, so the next question we took from one of our listeners, Todd Kuhl.
Yeah,
very German sounding name, written down Kuhl. Cool. So I think, Mark, are you going to read Todd's question?
Yeah, sure. So how do Yacøpsæ relate to the X? Have you played with them? Are you aware of them? Are you friends? It seems like you might have a lot of common due to your origins and your time on the underground touring scene.
So the X obviously being a kind of semi-legendary underground band from the Netherlands. Really big in the squat scene, run a lot of shows, kind of gang about with the likes of Fugazi and Wire and all those kind of bands over the years, haven't they? So let's see what Stoffel says.
That's an interesting comparison. Yes, we know the X, but unfortunately, not personally. And unfortunately, we haven't had any concerts together yet. That could be very interesting from a stylistic point of view. Personally, I love concerts where different bands play, and I used to find it tiring when, for example, 8 crust bands played in a row. Fortunately, our band seems to be in a better position if it comes to that kind of mixed concerts. In our career, we have often played completely different gigs. Sometimes it was pure punk rock nights, and sometimes we were the only hardcore band playing between a bunch of death metal bands. But back to the X, I've never been a big fan of the music, but I've been aware of their activities from time to time over the years. The X is a very unique band, and I like their approach and attitude. The group has been around since 1979, I think, and has created so much different music, done countless collaborations with different artists, and even played concerts in exotic countries like Ethiopia, as far as I know. It would be great if we could play together one fine day. Some try, by being a conquistador in Austria.
Ethiopia, wow.
Yeah.
Do you play in Ethiopia?
Yeah, absolutely.
I totally would, yeah.
Before we even pressed record, we were talking about the buzz of playing in the most bizarre locations. Certainly, if you can make it work as well, the X seem like the kind of band that can sort of bootstrap a gig together from whatever they can find. Some great music in Ethiopia anyway.
Would your guitar survive the journey, do you think?
It's interesting because I think that the answer to that question kind of underlines what we just said in terms of they've got quite eclectic tastes and they prefer sharing stages with people that are not identikit bands. I totally relate to that as well. As much as I love that style of music, when it's done well, I need it in small portions.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, all days of nothing but that to me are just brain damage that just completely fatigue me. I tune out pretty quickly. So the next question is from myself. I said, your shows must get pretty crazy sometimes. This has been a recurring theme recently, actually, in a couple of discussions. How do you feel about extreme mosh pits, windmills, circles, crowd killing? Modern hardcore tried to present itself as progressive and open to everyone, but do those kind of pits not work against that?
Punk was always about discharge, about losing control and such things. I have nothing against intense and crazy dancing as long as people show consideration for each other. But unfortunately, there are still far too many idiots who think pogoing and the like is martial art. This naturally puts off other people who also want to move to music, however they do it.
Yeah, so that's pretty much in keeping with what we've been finding talking about this recently. We spoke to Joe a fair bit about this because obviously the style of music that Joe plays, he gets a lot of really intense shows and really intense audiences. And I'm just I still remain to be convinced that there's a genuine progressive movement in those pits. We spoke a bit about it. There's definitely non-male people in those pits, but I think there's a physical aspect that's still leading those spaces to be dominated by the most physically intimidating, the biggest people, and because of the elbows and the high kicks and all that kind of shit, which I just have never been able to get my head around as an expression. I mean, no, I can get my head around it as an expression of just sheer fucking intense energy and catharsis, but not as anything that should be normalized, let alone encouraged in that space. I really, really don't get it. And it's unavoidable that people will choose not to step forward and be kicked in the mouth rather than the alternative. So therefore, you're segregating the space. You just are. It might not be totally obvious, and people might not even be aware of the fact, I don't want to go up anyway, it's no big deal. But it's like, well, yeah, but the middle of the room, the literal best part of the room to watch this concert, has literally been cleared out by a bunch of guys that are kicking at head height. And I just can't relate to that. I don't think it really marries with a lot of the notions of opening spaces to different people and making them welcoming. Yeah,
I mean, I've spoken about how much I dislike that practice myself as well. And I think obviously we have different opinion on it. And I know from experience of, a friend, Craig, who's probably listening, that he's seen it in fucking all over Europe, and it just is people that want to hurt people, man. And I've actually seen it with my own fucking eyes, man. Like when his band Revulsion played a festival here in Glasgow, there was a singer who was in one of the other bands. He was just walking around the side of the pit punching people. That's just what he was doing, and he was a big fucking guy as well. You wouldn't mess with him. You know what I mean? And Craig told me this story, and I totally forgot about it, and I should have spoken about it on the Biohazard episode, but it's a really good time to chuck it in now. Is like he was talking to a band who played the after party Sunday night, I guess, in the Flying Duck, which is another venue in Glasgow, and one of the guys literally tried to put a cigarette in somebody's eye in the pit, just because.
Why was he smoking in the pit?
Oh, I don't fucking know, but he did try to. Craig was like, he spoke to the guy afterwards, and the guy was speaking away him. He seemed as though he was pretty nice, man. And Craig just turned out to him and goes, "You know what, man? I used to think you were pretty sound until I seen you try to put a fag out in somebody's eye. So fuck off." And the guy was like, "Oh, okay," this English guy, and just walked away. But that's what people are like, man. Do you know what I mean? And I think I do agree with what you're saying, man. It's like these spaces aren't inclusive, and they're actually making them quite exclusive by bringing the kind of behaviour of just windmilling and punching the floor, which I think can be done in a relatively confined environment without hurting anybody if you're paying attention to your surroundings a little bit. And I have seen that done in the past. I think that's where it comes from in the 80s, that kind of hardcore windmilling stuff. Yeah. But then when it spills over and they actually, try to fight with people in the pit, which is not even fighting because it's never really although it's all consensual, it's never really something that you're ready for. Do you know what I mean?
It's just an odd sentiment. I mean, if you're into beefy macho bands, then I can completely embrace it, because it's like, right, okay, well, this is not a concern there. They're not going for these like inclusive spaces and progressive notions. They're just going for a big fucking meat fest. That I think there's a certain kind of band and a certain atmosphere that's conducive for it. I just don't understand it when people try and incorporate it and sort of like try and square peg into round hole of putting it into progressive spaces and pretending that somehow it's not what it is. And I do understand as well, there's a lot of people that do it that aren't deliberately looking to hurt people. They've sort of got this kind of weird duality in their head where they're like, no, I'm doing this, but it's just a celebration. It's like, yeah, but think about the celebration, think about the consequences, and think about the implications for inclusivity. Anyway, it's become a bit of a bugbear for me. Sorry if I keep banging on about it, but I just don't get it. And I don't for a minute think we should go to the extremes of like the Fugazi at the drive-in, like no crowd surfing, everybody stopping songs when the crowd gets too animated. Nothing against an animated crowd, nothing against bands fucking crowd surfing as long as the crowd's aware of it. But I think there's definitely there's something of a kind of red line. It's shades of grey, but there's definitely a point where it's like, wait, what the fuck are you doing, man? What the fuck is that?
Well, I guess people at those shows are aware of it, right? So they know it's going to happen, and the band encourage it. Whether or not they should is a completely different conversation, right? But
it's a fucking stupid shibboleth.
It's stupid, but like people go in expecting it, so I suppose it's not that surprising if it's what people.
And a lot of people don't go because they're expecting.
Yeah, exactly. It cuts both ways.
So, next question, Marcus, is you again.
Okay, I'm a big pop punk fan. I'm going to qualify this. I used to be a big pop punk fan. I'm now old.
Has it changed since you wrote this question?
I mean, I've reflected on it since this question. I don't really listen to a lot of pop punk anymore, but I did grow up listening to a lot of it, and I really like Weezer, and I think it's really cool that they did a covers album. So how does that music influence their music now, if at all?
Oh yeah, because Yacøpsæ brought out a covers record that had like 4 Weezer covers on it in the one record. Okay, let's see what Stoffel said.
The sea is foaming like a bottle of beer. The wave is coming, but I ain't got no fear. I'm waxing down to that elbow real fast. I'm waxing down because it's really a blast. I'm looking something cause I don't like the phrase. I'm wailing out because I hate to waste.
Pop-punk doesn't influence our music at all, especially since I'm the only one of us who listens to that kind of music privately. When we made the cover album 20 years ago, we all liked bands like Weezer, Ash, or Screeching Weasel, just to name a few. But back then, we were still in a different lineup. Apart from that, I wouldn't overrate the cover album. We made it out of a spontaneous idea, just for fun. We don't really see the album as a regular release, more like a kind of gimmick. The idea of making a cover album is not really unique. Many bands have done that to pay tribute to their idols or influences. For us, the gag was that people would have expected us to cover Infest, Neos, ODRI, Siege, or Hell Nation, that kind of stuff. So we said we'd do the exact opposite and put pop-punk in front of people's noses. What was also appealing about this little adventure was the different style of playing. Pop-punk is played completely different to extreme, fast hardcore. It was a kind of challenge.
There you go, Mark. Yeah. Doesn't like pop punk.
Yeah. Well, I think he said he does like pop punk, but the band don't. Is that not what he said?
He said he was the only one that was actually into it. And even then, I think, you're talking like 20 years ago, I suppose.
Which was a totally different lineup. You know? As we had not mentioned in our episode, that there's a new lineup from.
Oh God, it changed 2 more times subsequently. Yeah. But then again, it's really hard to get info on these guys.
And it makes sense. Like
I think it's odd that Ash is in there. That's one that really confused me. Don't get me wrong, by the way. I am not a hard and fast Ash hater. I've got some time for them. But I think it was just weird that it was like, Weezer, Screeching Weasel, all that kind of thing. And then Ash. It's like,
Ash were really close to Weezer in the early 2000s. And, I think they were really well liked in Europe. And, Burn All Angels and stuff. Was it Burn All Angels? Free All Angels, maybe?
Free All Angels,
Angels
was the album. But like 1977... was the really, really big one over
but
here.
They were getting more love and doing more touring in Europe and all that around about that time.
I smoke myself into a haze in the afternoon. It felt hot, the air was cool. Really dressed, white goddess. I settle into weather folds in the slow haze of the afternoon.
But yeah, he probably come up listening to, or probably listened to 1977 and all, and Petrol and all that in the mid-90s. And the other album, Nuclear Sounds.
Nuclear Sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that not the one? I think that's the one that was after 1977.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, next question, me again. So we've just spoken about the pop punk. I asked him, you confess to the pop punk bands that you like. Are there any embarrassing classic rock bands that you really like? And can we persuade you to do a cover album of those?
Unfortunately, I have to disappoint you. I hate classic rock, and I also hate heavy metal to the bone. Of course, there are a few songs from the last 60 years of rock history that I like because I liked them as a child. For example, Buggles with Video Killed the Radio Star. But a complete album by Kiss, for example, no way. I could rather imagine making a cover album of proto-punk bands like The Stooges or Wayne County and the Electric Chairs.
All right, totally unprompted. He says how much disdain he has for a Kiss album. And that was not in my question. I'm taking that pretty personally because that was really ultimately what I was getting at. Okay.
Again, unsurprising, really.
I mean, the funny thing is, I'm not a heavy metal fan. I mean, heavy metal in particular, as a phrase, is just suggestive of all manner of bands I don't like. Iron Maiden, fucking Def Leppard, and all that kind of stuff. Saxon, yeah. So I kind of get that, but I mean, classic rock, I have a lot of fucking time for certain classic rock bands, I'll be honest. I mean, Queen, for example, classic rock. I mean, they're the pop punk of rock music, aren't they? Okay, well, that's not going to happen anytime soon then. The proto-punk thing's quite cool, though. You know, we've actually covered quite a lot of proto-punk bands in this as well.
Yeah. Again, I mean, you can hear elements of that in their early records. Yeah. You know, so again, that's cool to know. It'd be cool to hear them do a Stooges cover. I'd be up for that.
It'd be cool to hear them do a Death cover, but like the proto-punk Death, not the Chuck Schuldiner one. Okay, next question was courtesy of Vicky. Vicky recorded it for us, so let's hear what she asked. And Vicky said, if Yacøpsæ were starting out as a band today, with all the changes that have happened in music in the last 20 years, how would it affect the development of the band? Were there advantages then that are not available to new bands now, and are there advantages for bands now that you did not have?
The advantages back then were that you had to make more of an effort to achieve something, as we still had to type letters on typewriters and send tapes by post. You got contacts through copied flyers that were enclosed in the letters or through fanzines. That was also somehow more exciting because it always involves a certain amount of waiting time. Sometimes you had to wait a few weeks for a single to arrive from the USA or a tape from Brazil, for example. Accordingly, people attached more importance to things. The advantage today is the easier and faster networking provided by the internet. However, this also creates a certain arbitrariness and things are no longer valued as much. 2 mouse clicks on a Bandcamp page and click on. Unfortunately, a lot of things degenerate into disposable consumer goods. But I'm not saying that everything was better back then. It was just different. One thing I personally like is the technology has developed to the point where you can make studio quality recordings in the comfort of your own home. When I think about the fact that we used to only have the option of putting a cassette recorder in the corner of the rehearsal room, that's progress.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's multiple layers there, and I think as anytime we've discussed this subject, there are definitely pros and cons. We spoke on the episode about Yacøpsæ and the fact that so many of their early recordings were like cassette deck recordings and rough as a badger's arse. Like. Yeah, there was a lot of charm in that though, at the same time. Would I prefer a rough analog cassette recording to a really hellishly bad digital pieced together demo? Probably. How about you?
I don't know.
There's more hell and fury. I mean, I've got like albums by the Germs, like Live at the Whiskey A Go-Go, that are just sort of like desk recordings, like stereo out the desk, absolute shit shows, but yet there's an exciting quality to them.
Yeah, but there's like with that kind of shit though, like if you're going to record like in a room, like with just a tape recorder, You'll definitely do at least a couple of checks to make sure that there's some balance to the levels.
Yeah.
You know?
Like literally, I remember pushing amps to and fro, like try to get a distance so you got the balance, like moving it round so you got a bit more snare and a bit less cymbals, all that kind of stuff. Like, tweak the bass a bit, there's not enough bottom end.
But at least when you do it digitally, you can get a decent balance pretty quickly then, but it's just the other factors then come into play which you need to make it sound good, which are mitigated by the ambient sound of a room.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I mean, see that initial period when home computers could suddenly actually multi-track demos for the first time, but early 2000s probably. Late 90s, in fact. I remember doing it in the late 90s. And you had all these like really dry snare drums separated from these like really craply recorded kick drums, and then guitars plugged straight in. And there was an era of demo that sounds very much like that, because now you've got, it's like a filter on like a visual app. Take this crap guitar and make it sound better, please.
Yeah.
Click. And it automatically just sounds, even if it doesn't sound good per se, it sounds better. And at the point though where you could multi-track on a computer before you had that functionality, those demos, there's an era of demos back then that are fucking so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, so bad, because they're like the worst of both worlds, because they don't have any of the energy or the performance. They're just awful.
Yeah. The thing about the guitars is really interesting, because even I'm still continually surprised at how good DSP stuff sounds now. Because they use impulse response now, as opposed to just like trying to make a version of an amp. Just basically record the response to the amp, and it actually sounds like a real fucking guitar played in a really big room, and that's like an incredible leap forward in technology that makes a good guitar sound available to everybody. I could go home just now and plug into Positive Grid's like Bias FX2, which I have at home, and I've got my own amp set up there with its own pedals and reverbs and everything, and it just sounds better than any amp I've ever actually played in real life. You know what I mean? And it's incredible. But then, like I said, when you start bringing other instruments into the mix, then the thing that you don't get is, like you say, like trying to balance the reverb of a snare against the reverb of a guitar, and what it might sound like in a room, and make it sound like it's real, is harder than just plonking a cassette recorder in a room.
Well,
you know what I mean?
It's funny because we maybe underestimate how sophisticated our senses are, especially from a lifetime of listening to music, that you get the uncanny valley effect where this should sound like a proper album, but there's something here that just sounds unreal. And as you say, it's like, because, for example, the reverbs are maybe slightly different, so it sounds like your drum, even though you think it's roughly the same, the drum is a different reverb from the guitar, which is a different reverb from the vocal, which is, there's some kind of like very subtle audio qualities that just actually tell you, the listener, subconsciously, this didn't all happen the way you think it happened. And you get like the equivalent of an uncanny valley effect, where it's like, that face looks almost real, but there's something not right about it. I hear that with recordings all the time, especially if someone's tried to fix something and they've kind of botched it. You're like, it's just, there's something weird there, and I don't know what it is, but it's alienating as a result. Without dwelling too much on that, like talking about the commodification thing, funnily enough, I mentioned it on the show. When I got Grozny Tanz on vinyl, I sent away to the Czech Republic for it, and then waited almost a month for it to come back. And when it came back, I was fucking stoked. I was really, really pleased to get it. It was like,
you use the word stoked.
Yeah, I know. I actually put it in there as a sort of a peace offering. But yeah, I got that, and it did feel really special. I was like, this is great. This is like a little sense of occasion. This has arrived, put it on. It was really exciting. So yeah, there is like a sense of worth and a sense of achievement and attainment in getting that isn't necessarily there if you just idly click through stuff on Bandcamp. That said, it's great that you can get so much music at the click of a button.
And great quality music as well.
Great quality music, totally varied, and especially if we're saying this, from a privileged position where we could, we didn't have the best access to stuff. I'm sure like Weaver will tell you up north, didn't have the best access to music, but compare that to the access to music that some people have, a lot of people have, who live in the middle of nowhere, and now they can go and listen to anything. They go and, somebody working on a farm in Delhi can go and listen to your band.
Yeah.
Just at the click of a button, and that is pretty astonishing,
Small sidebar. One thing that Spotify, etc., is really good for, music platforms that are not Bandcamp basically is really good for, is finding new bands, but it can also like put you right into an echo chamber.
Yeah.
Essentially, where you never really find anything new. you know. And I've actually found out myself recently. I've been like really wanting to like listen to a new band, and I'm actually finding myself a lot of time going, where the fuck did I start?
Yeah, but it's a wee bit like the Virgin Megastore effect, right? So they would have the Discovery shelf, right? And on one hand, you're like, oh, this is great. There's like new stuff to listen to, but also it's curated. It's a limited sense of discovery. So you are seeing new stuff, but you're only seeing a very narrow slice of new stuff. So it's useful, but it's only really truly useful. It's only truly positive when used in conjunction with other avenues that allow you to properly absorb like a multitude of different things. Because if you do only stick to it, even if it tells you it's giving you choice, it's only giving you very limited choice. And that was always my beef with like those shelves and, you know, the front of when you walked into Virgin Megastore, you'd have all these new things, and some of them were great, but you're always like, well, there's like 1,000 for every one of those though, and why are they not getting picked? And so ultimately you realised that somebody was putting that there. It wasn't just there purely on merit. So yeah, I think Spotify, great in some ways for finding new stuff, especially stuff that's sort of up and running, but in terms of like completely sourcing out your own from scratch, yeah, platforms like Bandcamp, platforms like even SoundCloud, because of the uploadability of stuff, that's really useful. Actually, to be fair to it, and I'm not here to advertise YouTube, but YouTube's really good for that as well. You get a lot of really obscure stuff in that.
Yeah, I think YouTube's algorithm isn't really the same, is it? So it's kind of a bit more fucking gung-ho.
It is, absolutely, yeah. You get wild selections. I mean, doing the Yacøpsæ episode, I mean, the stuff, the rabbit holes I ended up down on YouTube, because it's just, and it's things that, you know, fans can upload them. It's not that same sort of control, whereas in Spotify it's very unlikely that fans will upload things, whereas in YouTube multiple versions of something will be uploaded. And if you've got an obscure 7-inch for like 1982 that the band broke up, they're all fucking dead, whatever, you know, Glenn Hugin and the Hugin Notes, you know, it's like it's up there, and YouTube's kind of good for that as well. So that's also a place that you can find some really interesting things.
Next and final question.
Yeah, the last question comes from me. Using your many years of experience, what's the hardest part of being in a band, and what's the best?
I think that has to be considered in terms of different levels of quality. The most difficult thing is definitely the coordination of time, if a band manages to exist for several years. Because the priorities outside the band shift over time as band members go into professional life, start a family, and so on. It's easier in the beginning. You still went to school, had more time, played at local parties because the band was still unknown, and so on. You also have to assess individually how much passion and dedication someone devotes to the music. For some, it's enough to run a band as a nice hobby and to perform in the local area from time to time, while others have higher goals, want to get out and see something of the world. I can only speak for us now, but for us the best thing is that we get to travel the world, meet lots of nice people who share our attitude and ideals, and that it all happens within a self-determined framework that is outside the mainstream.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that would probably be, if I was answering my own question, being on the same page in a band. If you're doing a band, bearing in mind this does not necessarily apply to the same extent to solo projects and things like that, but yeah, being on the same page, because especially when you start pouring your effort into something, you find out 6 months down the line that one guy didn't actually want to do a tour, one guy doesn't actually want to spend any money on a studio, and you're like, but the rest of us do.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you can get setbacks, especially at crucial times that really...
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an experiential thing, right? You know,
it also changes. It's impossible to predict because, you know, Stoffel mentioned there, you know, people have children, people have problems with their health, people have problems with jobs, get promotions, things like that. And I'm sure we've all experienced that. So even if people are on the same page at the start, it's a dynamic situation, isn't it? It can easily change.
I mean, I like to, from experiences in my first band, I like to always like set the expectation quite early on in any project, just to say, well, look, it's just kind of what I want. What do we want to do? What do we think is going to happen? And obviously things in people's lives and stuff do change, and plans change and stuff over the years, and people's health can crop up and be an issue as well, as I've experienced that myself recently. I mean, not me personally, but for you. So.
For our band, our band's, in fact, I would say all three of my bands had really, really big bumps in the road due to different individuals and health problems.
But by setting out the expectation quite early on, you can mitigate some of those problems in terms of, you know, like spending money going to the studio. Well, if we all want to do that, then we know we need to get to that point. Or if we want to go on tour, we know we need to do that. We all need to get to that point. Sometimes life's just is life and does life stuff that fucks you up. Do you know what I mean? But
it's also the resilience to deal with that, though. That's the other thing. Like, you can hit a bump in the road, or you can, somebody can have to take a promotion, and maybe, oh, sorry guys, I can't do this tour. But then it also comes down to how good are relationships in the band, and can you get past that hurdle? Because I've both been in situations where we've got past it, and in situations where the band wasn't in as good shape and we didn't get past it. So yeah, I think it's interesting that his answer is almost identical.
It's probably a universal answer, right? I think not taking anything away from his answer, but I think,
well, some people would probably say making ends meet. That's a huge problem in bands now.
I guess for him and for us, it's never really been part of the game, has it? Really,
possibly. Aye, and it's also maybe more of a thing now. I mean, Stoffel is of a different generation. People trying to be professional musicians now, it's really fucking difficult. It's so limited in revenue streams.
Difficult in such a different way than it was back when we started out. It was difficult. It's the same problems still exist, to be fair, but they're just now amplified by like everything being so much more expensive and venues being closed, and and
I have to say, there did seem more of a sense, even when I started like 23 years ago. There did seem to be more of a sense of, if you work really, really hard, you'll attain some level of success. Whereas I'm not convinced that if you work really, really hard now, you can now be sure of attaining any level of success.
Yeah, consistency in any kind of art form will eventually reap some kind of dividend at some point, regardless of how big that dividend is. But I think
that's less true now.
It's harder now, I think, for sure,
because
for that to be the case.
Back in the day, selling merch at gigs when that was still a thing, and just generally being on the road hardcore throughout a year. If you were one of those bands that did like 150 gigs a year, you would start to get some level.
Somebody would notice somewhere that's got some quote unquote power.
Yeah, and I'm just not sure that's the case. In terms of the best thing, that's weird for me, because that actually dovetails with the hardest thing. Stoffel's saying seeing places, traveling, meeting people. That's absolutely. I'm totally in agreement with him. For me, the band was sort of a means to an end to have adventures. We were talking about going fucking playing tours in like Siberia, and going playing tours in like some of the most remote parts of the world, and how exciting that is. And I think that's also where a lot of bands fall apart, because when you get those opportunities, some people are like, I'm not really up for that. And that can be the litmus test of that band. But yeah, I completely relate to what Stoffel said there. That has definitely been the highlight of being in bands for me, is the places I've ended up that I would definitely not have ended up. Because it's not like going on holiday, let's go to Bordeaux, let's go to Milan. No, let's go to a fucking farm in the middle of like northeast France and stay in a barn, that kind of thing. Like, you get into some weird situations, but very memorable, and you just meet some great people as well.
My last band were back together for a show later this year, and we had practice on Monday night there, and we were actually like, we've got a new bass player now, but the three of us who were originally in the band were reminiscing about just like fucking playing Bolton. Do you know what I mean?
Bolton.
It's fucking Bolton, man. Nobody wants to. Bolton's a shithole. No one wants to go there. But it's still fucking cool though.
It's the kind of place you only end up in if you're going for a conference.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and fuck, I don't know what conference would take place there, to be honest.
Chips.
All the chips, aye. Even then, they couldn't get that right.
Kebab conference.
They couldn't get the kebab right when we were there. I'll tell you that, by the way. But just having that, like, meeting the people and having the story to share and having the adventure, I think that's the thing that sustains you. And sometimes it can be shite as well when you play like 30 people in fucking Prestwick. Do you know what I mean? Like 3 people in Prestwick probably on a fucking Tuesday night, or get electrocuted on stage in Dundee on a Sunday night, which happened to me when nobody was in the room.
I could tell. That was clearly from experience.
But I think it makes it all worth it in the end. When you in hindsight, you're like, that's actually quite ridiculous, isn't it? Quite funny.
I mean, Yacøpsæ have been doing it like bosses for a long time. They made loads of connections in Colombia, I think it was, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And so that's amazing. Really. I mean, why else are you going to be fucking driving around the roads of Colombia, And
think about it when you're older and past the point of being able to do it or caring about it anymore. You can always look back and go, how the fuck did we manage to do that? Yeah. That's some experience.
Absolutely, yeah, totally. Nah, I mean, I'd see them as a bit of an inspiration in that sense as well. The fact that they stuck with it as well. They were like, we don't want anything to get in the road of this, and this is what we enjoy, which is playing, going places, being around people we like and meeting new people. And, you know, going back to that Metal Blade answer, it's like, that's not really got that much appeal for us because that's not what we wanted to get out of it in the first place.
Yeah.
And I'm really fucking pleased that there's still bands like Yacøpsæ, and I personally see them as they give me encouragement. You know what I mean? And yeah, fucking long may it continue. I hope we get to meet those guys. I've mentioned to them that if they are coming over here, then we'll do our best to try and help them. And I hope if you listen to this show and you like Yacøpsæ, drop us an email and we'll pass it on. And we'll say, well, here's someone else that heard your show, heard your music, and would be interested in helping you get a gig together. Because I would love to bring them over. I would love to sit down and just hear about Colombia. Yeah, thanks a lot, Stoffel. Really appreciated that. I really enjoyed covering the band, and it was really nice that you offered to answer these questions.
Yeah.
Thanks to the folks that submitted questions and recorded them. We'll try and do something like this again.
Yeah, I feel nice and warm and fuzzy after that. That's lovely.
Let's do something shite next week to get things back on track.
The XX.
See you all later.
Bye.
Hey, it's Michelle Beadle. That's right, the Michelle Beadle. You're welcome. You love talking about sports. I love talking about sports. You know the only thing cooler than talking about sports? Sports! And right now, all your favorite sports are on Sirius XM. I'm talking every NFL game, every game from the NBA, NHL, MLB, every NASCAR race, golf major conference college sports, and all the top games in the WNBA. If it gets your heart pumping, it's on Sirius XM. To start your free trial of Sirius XM today, visit SiriusXM.com/believe.